For 5 years, my mother told everyone in our extended family that I was a waitress and, in her words, the disappointment of the family. At her 60th birthday party, she introduced me to a table of relatives as the one who didn't finish college. I smiled, said nothing, and handed her a business card. She looked at the card, looked at me, and the wine glass in her hand slipped straight out of her fingers. My name is Faith Halloway. I'm 34. Before I explain what was actually printed on that card, let me take you back to when I was 19, because none of what happened at that birthday party makes sense without understanding exactly why I left college in the first place, and exactly what my mother chose to believe about that decision instead of ever asking me directly. If you're the kind of person who watches a story through to the end, go ahead and subscribe, only if you genuinely mean it. Drop your city and local time in the comments, I read every one. I grew up in Carbondale, Illinois, the oldest of 3 children. My father, Russell, worked as a machinist at a manufacturing plant that had, for most of my childhood, provided a stable if modest income. My mother, Deborah, managed our household and, later, worked part-time at a fabric store once all 3 of us were old enough for school. I'd been accepted, at 18, into a solid-state university 2 hours from home, majoring in accounting, with a partial academic scholarship covering roughly a third of the cost. My parents had been, understandably, proud, the first of their children to attend a 4-year university, a milestone they'd talked about at every family gathering that first semester with obvious pride. 16 months into my sophomore year, everything about our family's stability collapsed within the span of about 6 weeks. My father's plant announced sudden layoffs, eliminating his position along with nearly 200 others, the result of a corporate restructuring nobody had seen coming. 3 weeks later, my youngest brother, Miles, then 11, was diagnosed with a serious autoimmune condition requiring specialized treatment not fully covered by my parents' suddenly precarious insurance situation. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening in October, her voice carrying a controlled panic I'd never heard from her before, explaining the full scope of what was happening: my father's unemployment, Miles's mounting medical bills, my other brother Desmond's tuition at the local community college, a mortgage payment that suddenly felt impossible to sustain without my father's income. She didn't ask me directly to leave school. I want to be clear about that, because it matters to how everything unfolded afterward. What she did instead was lay out the situation in exhausting, overwhelming detail, describing options that all seemed to circle back to one obvious solution neither of us said out loud during that call. I withdrew from the university 2 weeks later, at 19, and moved back to Carbondale. I found work immediately at a diner near the highway, the only job I could get quickly enough to start contributing to household expenses within days rather than weeks. Within 4 months, I was promoted to shift supervisor. Within a year, the diner's owner, a woman named Sylvie who'd taken a genuine interest in my work ethic, offered to help me pursue a hospitality management certification through a local community college program, night classes I could manage around my full shifts. I never told my mother the actual math I did that October, that I'd calculated, quietly, exactly how many months of diner wages would keep Miles's treatment funded, exactly how much of my own scholarship money I'd need to formally return, exactly what returning to school later, once things stabilized, might realistically look like versus what my mother's panic was implying needed to happen immediately. What my mother told the rest of the family, in the months and then years that followed, was a considerably simpler story: that I'd dropped out of college because I couldn't handle the workload, that I'd given up on the opportunity they'd worked so hard to provide, that I was now just waitressing, while my siblings, eventually, both went on to complete their own degrees once the family's financial situation stabilized. I didn't correct that story initially, partly out of exhaustion, and partly, I think, out of a kind of protective instinct toward my mother. Some part of me understood that admitting the actual truth, that I'd left school specifically to help fund Miles's treatment and keep our household afloat during my father's unemployment, would have required her to sit with a guilt she seemed determined not to examine. By the time Miles's health stabilized and my father found new employment 18 months later, the family narrative about my college departure had already calcified into something nobody seemed interested in revisiting. I'd become, in my mother's retelling at every subsequent family gathering, the one who didn't finish, a phrase she used with a specific, dismissive lightness that made clear she'd never once considered there might be more to the story. I stayed in the restaurant industry after that, initially out of practical necessity, but increasingly, over the following years, out of genuine passion I hadn't expected to discover. I completed that hospitality certification, then pursued additional coursework in restaurant finance and operations, slowly building expertise that had nothing to do with the waitress label my mother continued applying to me at every opportunity. By 26, I'd moved from Sylvie's Diner into a management position at a growing regional restaurant group. By 29, I'd been recruited into a director of operations role. By 32, following a private investment round I'd helped structure with two former colleagues, I co-founded my own hospitality consulting firm, specializing in operational turnarounds for struggling independent restaurants, a business that, within its first 18 months, had already worked with over a dozen clients across 3 states. None of this ever fully registered with my mother, despite my occasional, increasingly rare attempts to mention it during family conversations. She'd absorbed the story of 19-year-old Faith who gave up on college, so completely that no amount of subsequent professional development seemed capable of updating it in her mind. Her 60th birthday party, held at a rented event space in downtown Carbondale, brought together nearly 60 guests, extended family, longtime family friends, several of my mother's former coworkers from the fabric store. I'd flown in from Chicago, where I'd relocated from my consulting firm 3 years earlier, specifically to attend, despite a demanding travel schedule that week. I arrived to find my seating assignment placed at a table near the kitchen entrance, tucked alongside distant cousins I barely knew, while my siblings, Desmond and Miles, both now with completed degrees, Desmond in finance and Miles, remarkably, in pre-med, sat at the head table alongside my parents, positions of honor that felt, even before anything was said, like a physical manifestation of exactly how my mother had organized her understanding of her children's respective worth. I left Millbrook at 18. Not for glory, not for some grand sense of purpose. For air. Annapolis stripped every soft excuse I'd hidden behind for 18 years. The Chesapeake wind cut through wool peacoats. Upperclassmen found every weakness I'd buried under achievement and called it out at full volume, and I loved it, because the standards were brutal but they were honest. A physical readiness test didn't care whether my sister was charming. A navigation exam didn't care whether my father approved. A tactical scenario didn't shift because a man back home wanted me smaller. I graduated near the top of my class and commissioned into naval intelligence. My father attended the ceremony because my mother insisted. He shook my hand afterward and said, "This'll read well in the practice's holiday newsletter." My mother hugged me long enough to wrinkle my dress whites, her cheek against my collar. "Finish what you started," she whispered. The Navy sent me into places my family would later flatten into the phrase, somewhere overseas. The first was a signals intelligence facility outside Manama, dust finding its way through sealed doors and settling into everything, including our coffee. We tracked shipping manifests, coded maritime traffic, smuggling routes disguised as fishing fleets. One week, a phrase surfaced across 3 unrelated intercepts: tin roof. Analysts flagged it as regional slang. I noticed the timing instead. Each mention landed exactly 9 minutes before a specific patrol boat changed its position. I recommended rerouting a logistics convoy scheduled through a narrow strait the following morning. My commanding officer pushed back. "You're building a decision on 2 words. 3 intercepts are building the decision," I said. We rerouted. A rigged skiff detonated against the original route 11 minutes after our convoy would have passed through it. Commander Aaron Delacroix was a lieutenant then. He stood beside me as the feed washed white with smoke. "You just saved that whole convoy," he said. "We changed a route." "No," he said. "You saw the hand reaching for the knife before anyone else noticed the table." He became the first officer who understood exactly how my mind worked. I didn't need the loudest voice in the room. I needed whoever noticed the pattern nobody else was looking for. Years later, in a windowless facility outside Stuttgart, I identified a cyber intrusion buried inside routine maintenance traffic on an Allied logistics network. The intrusion mimicked an approved contractor's coding style almost perfectly, except the contractor always pushed his updates before lunch, and these updates were arriving at 2:40 every morning. That 4-hour gap exposed a breach already sitting inside 3 connected defense systems. We called the response iron current. The name never made a newspaper. Neither did mine. We shut the intrusion down, but 2 officers were lost during the field phase of the operation. I'd signed the authorization sending them forward. Their families got folded flags and carefully limited explanations. I got a new assignment. That's command, some days. You carry names nobody's allowed to say out loud, and the world calls your silence about it absence instead of what it actually is. I missed my mother's last birthday because of iron current. She died 5 months later of ovarian cancer while I was stationed in Rota, Spain. My father told the hospital not to contact my command, because he said he didn't want to interrupt national security business over something inevitable. Priscilla sat at her bedside the whole time. I arrived 2 days after the funeral. The house smelled like lilies and cold coffee. My mother's reading chair had already been moved out of the den. Priscilla was sorting sympathy cards by importance. My father handed me a cardboard box. "Your mother kept your military things," he said. "I have no use for them." Inside were every letter I'd sent home, 4 photographs of me in uniform, my commissioning program, and my regional debate certificate, pressed flat between 2 of her old cookbooks. My mother had kept everything. My father had displayed none of it. I carried the box out to the porch. He followed me. "You chose this life," he said. "Don't come home now expecting the rest of us to rearrange ourselves around your regret." I looked at him. "My regret isn't the career." He frowned like the sentence had refused to obey him. That was the day I stopped waiting for my father to understand me. 22 years after graduation, our high school announced its reunion at the Hartwell Country Club outside Millbrook. Priscilla chaired the organizing committee. She'd followed our father into a stable profession, corporate law, then a senior compliance role inside the Department of Defense's Cyber Oversight Division. Publicly, she was respected. Privately, she still used family history like a weapon whenever it suited her. Her invitation arrived without any mention of my rank. That didn't bother me. The note she'd tucked inside it did. "Nora, Dad would appreciate it if you kept your work vague this year." Most of our classmates built real, visible careers, and vague hints about classified work can come across as attention-seeking. I read it standing at my kitchen counter in Norfolk. Beside the invitation sat a sealed envelope I'd finally pulled out of my mother's cardboard box after years of avoiding it, because the front carried my father's handwriting. "For Nora, not to be released." Beneath it, my mother had written in blue ink, "Keep this. One day they may force you to use it." I slid the envelope into my clutch. The clubhouse chandelier scattered light across the marble entry when I arrived. The concierge handed me a name tag with nothing on it but Nora Renwood, no title, no branch, no distinction. Other guests wore tags listing their credentials underneath their names. Dr. Alan Voss, State Senator Diane Petrie, Priscilla Renwood, Department of Defense. I smiled at the concierge and walked in. My table was near the service doors. My entry in the reunion booklet had no biography printed beneath it. The space was simply blank. Marcus Feld found me before dinner started. We'd dated briefly senior year, before Annapolis made him decide I'd rejected him personally by choosing it. "Still pushing paperwork for the Navy?" he asked, holding a glass of bourbon. "I still work," I said. He laughed. "Always mysterious. Priscilla said you never made it into anything operational." 2 other classmates drifted over. One asked if I'd been a records clerk. Another guessed logistics. Priscilla approached in emerald silk and kissed the air near my cheek. "Nora never cared much about advancement," she told the group. "She prefers support roles." "That's generous of her," Marcus said. My father sat at the head table beneath the reunion banner, age curving his shoulders but not softening his authority. He lifted his glass toward me without smiling. Not a greeting, an instruction. "Behave." I took my seat. My old history teacher, Mr. Aldrich, stopped by the table during the entree course. His hair had gone white, but his eyes hadn't changed. "I still think about your paper on maritime interdiction strategy," he said. That was a long time ago. Good work outlasts attention, he said, studying my face. I've read a few unattributed pieces where the thinking sounded very familiar. Before I could answer, Priscilla called him toward the stage. He touched the back of my chair on his way. Some of us always knew you didn't disappear. That sentence did more for me than he could have known. Dinner ended. The lights dimmed for the slideshow, curated entirely around Priscilla's highlight reel. Priscilla at Georgetown Law, Priscilla shaking hands with a deputy secretary, Priscilla at a ribbon cutting. My commissioning photograph flashed for under 2 seconds. The caption read, Nora Renwood, Naval Administration. My father nodded approvingly. The first humiliation had been private. The second one had witnesses. The third one came with a microphone. Priscilla accepted the Distinguished Alumni Award to warm applause. She thanked our teachers, our town, our father. Dad always taught us that real leadership means being visible when people need you, she said. Some of us choose the front. Others find comfort staying in the background. Her eyes found mine across the room. My sister Nora is here tonight. She left a promising legal track to join the Navy. Not every choice becomes a success story, but every choice teaches us something. Careful laughter moved through the ballroom. Marcus stood, glass raised. To Priscilla, proof that leading from the front beats hiding in a back office. The laugh that followed was louder. My father didn't laugh. He did something worse. He clapped. Priscilla continued. Our reunion committee reviewed the alumni records this year. We found several unsupported claims connected to Nora's name regarding sensitive military work. To protect the integrity of the school's record, we've removed those claims pending verification. There it was. Not teasing anymore. Institutional. She lifted a printed resolution. The Alumni Board has also referred the matter to appropriate federal contacts, since impersonating senior military authority is a serious offense. A few heads turned sharply. Marcus lowered his glass. My father leaned toward the microphone at his table. My daughter has always struggled to accept ordinary limits, he said. This is painful, but necessary. The room stopped being amused. It went hungry instead. A county sheriff's deputy approached my table with an apologetic look. Ms. Renwood, we received a request to verify your identity. Priscilla had planned every detail of this. She'd expected anger, denial, a scene she could describe later as proof of exactly what she'd claimed about me. I opened my clutch and touched the sealed envelope. My secure phone lit up once, a message from my aide, extraction authorized. 8 minutes. I turned it face down. Ma'am, the deputy said, do you have military identification on you? Yes. Priscilla raised the resolution. Not before the board records its finding. We've spent years protecting this school's integrity from unverifiable claims. Nora can't keep using classification as an excuse forever. My father struck his cane against the floor. Answer your sister, Nora. I looked at him. You should have asked before she signed it. My voice barely carried. He heard it anyway. The lights outside flickered. A low vibration moved through the water glasses on the tables. Guests glanced toward the terrace doors. Priscilla kept talking, riding the momentum. This is exactly the problem. Nora shows up, deflects reasonable questions, and expects us all to accept she's important because she hints at classified work. The vibration became a roar. Linen lifted off the outdoor tables. The terrace doors blew open under the force of rotor wash, and the Black Hawk came down over the 9th green, landing lights cutting sideways through the dark. My father stood. Priscilla lost a heel crossing the patio floor. Commander Delacroix stepped off the aircraft with the cuffed case, walked straight to me, and saluted. Lieutenant Colonel Renwood, Fleet Cyber Command has confirmed the intrusion. The Joint Staff needs your assessment within the hour. Nobody applauded. The truth was too large for applause, at least at first. It moved through the crowd in small physical details, Marcus's mouth opening without sound, the deputy stepping backward, the alumni chair slowly lowering the printed resolution, my father's cane beginning to shake against the stone floor. Priscilla straightened her shoulders, still fighting for the room. This proves nothing, she said quickly. Anyone can arrange a dramatic entrance, Nora. This is reckless. You can't bring military assets to a private event because you feel embarrassed. Delacroix turned toward her. Ma'am, this aircraft was diverted under operational authority. Lieutenant Colonel Renwood is coordinating the joint response to an active national security intrusion. Priscilla's voice thinned. Lieutenant Colonel. A rear admiral stepped off the helicopter behind Delacroix. Admiral Denise Halloran had overseen Iron Current from its planning stage onward. She crossed the wet grass without an umbrella, rain darkening the shoulders of her service uniform. "Colonel Renwood," she said, "we need the Sentinel assessment." The word landed on Priscilla harder than the rank had. Her division at the Department of Defense had handled classified briefings that referenced Sentinel, the designation for the officer authorized to coordinate response across compromised Allied cyber infrastructure. She'd read reports about my own work for years without ever knowing whose name sat behind the codename. Admiral Halloran turned to face the room. For operational reasons, Lieutenant Colonel Renwood's service record has been partially sealed for 16 years. What I can state publicly is that her decisions have prevented attacks against American personnel, Allied networks, and civilian infrastructure on multiple occasions. Mr. Aldrich's voice came back to me. Good work outlasts attention. Priscilla's fingers tightened around the printed resolution. My father finally found his voice. Nora, why was your family never informed of any of this? I looked at him. You were informed. I took the sealed envelope out of my clutch. My mother's blue handwriting faced him directly. His expression changed, not surprise. Recognition. I handed the envelope to Admiral Halloran. My mother instructed me to keep this. She broke the seal. Inside were copies of correspondence my command had sent to my father over the years, invitations to promotion ceremonies, official family notifications, a citation for classified valor with the sensitive sections redacted, a request for him to attend a private Pentagon recognition ceremony after Iron Current. Every letter carried his signature. Received. Warren Renwood. Beneath the stack was a handwritten statement from my mother. Admiral Halloran read it aloud. My husband has hidden Nora's military correspondence for years because he believes her success embarrasses Priscilla and complicates his plans for this family. I have made copies of everything. If Nora is ever accused of abandoning us, or inventing her service, these records will show that Warren always knew the truth. The air in the ballroom changed. My father lowered himself slowly into a chair. Priscilla turned toward him. You knew. He stared at the wet stone under his shoes. All of it. She pressed. He didn't answer. Admiral Halloran unfolded one final document, an email printed from a Department of Defense account. Priscilla's account. 8 years earlier, a Navy Review Board had considered me for a classified valor award connected to Iron Current. Priscilla, listed as a family point of contact during our mother's illness, had responded on my behalf without my knowledge. Lieutenant Colonel Renwood declines public consideration and requests that all civilian references to her service be withdrawn. The email carried Priscilla's digital signature. She hadn't simply believed my father's version of events. She'd actively maintained it, for years, in writing. Priscilla's face lost its composure entirely. I was protecting you, she said. You always said your work was classified. You hated attention. Dad said publicity could compromise operations. I thought I was keeping this family out of something dangerous. You removed my name from the school's records, I said. Her mouth tightened. You'd already left us. I left Millbrook, I said. You left me with him. The words came out before either of us could soften them. For 1 second, she wasn't a federal official or the most distinguished alumna in the room. She was my frightened little sister, standing in a kitchen after I'd already found my way out. I understood her. I didn't excuse her. Admiral Halloran closed the file. The award board reopened Colonel Renwood's case 3 months ago. The falsified declaration is now part of that review. Priscilla stared at the document in her hands, the terrace lights reflecting off it, bright and useless. The alumni committee chair stepped forward, cleared his throat. Ms. Renwood, the board's resolution is withdrawn. Priscilla looked around the ballroom for support. Marcus looked down at his shoes. My father studied his cane. The people who'd laughed 20 minutes earlier now avoided her eyes entirely. That was her collapse. Not screaming. Not punishment. Isolation, arriving while the room was still full. Delacroix touched the case at his wrist. Colonel, we need to move. I turned toward the helicopter. Marcus stepped into my path first. Nora, I'm sorry. I believed what they told me. You preferred it, I said. He flinched. Priscilla called my name from behind me. I stopped, but didn't turn around. Were you ever going to tell me? She asked. You spent 20 years making sure I couldn't. I boarded the aircraft. No final look back, no ceremony to it. The reunion lights shrank beneath us as we crossed toward Burlington, rain moving in silver lines across the window. Delacroix opened the case, and the screens filled with network maps, access logs, threat indicators. Work returned. It steadied me the way it always had. We contained the intrusion before sunrise. A compromised contractor had inserted malicious code into an allied logistics platform, designed to spread into civilian emergency response networks. No cities lost power. No hospitals lost service. Nobody at that reunion would ever fully understand how close the country had come to remembering that night for an entirely different reason. 3 weeks later, the alumni board restored my record in full. They offered to rename the school's leadership hall after me. I declined. They placed one bronze line beneath my graduation photograph instead. Lieutenant Colonel Nora Renwood, service verified beyond public record. It was enough. My father resigned from the church building committee shortly after my mother's statement became public. Nobody forced him to. People simply stopped asking him to speak at things. He still lives in the house behind his old practice. Priscilla pays for a part-time caregiver now. According to Marcus, my father spends most afternoons in the kitchen with the television off. He called me once, several months later. I thought keeping you quiet would keep the family balanced, he said. You confused balance with control, I said. I was proud of you. No, I said. You were afraid of what other people would think if they found out I'd surpassed the version of me you'd already decided on. He was quiet on the line for a long moment. I ended the call without anger, though I didn't feel warmth either. Just something closer to relief that the conversation had finally happened at all. Priscilla's appointment was delayed pending review of the falsified email. She wasn't prosecuted, there wasn't quite enough there for that, and I hadn't pushed for it either. She was reassigned instead, to a role with considerably fewer cameras and far fewer invitations. For the first time in her adult life, she started walking into rooms where nobody already assumed she was the most important person in them. Months later, she asked to meet me at a small coffee shop near Burlington's waterfront. She wore jeans, no makeup, and she set a faded photograph on the table between us, 2 girls in homemade camouflage costumes, saluting beside a wooden fence. I was 10 in it. She was 8. Our mother had sewn our names above the breast pockets. You kept it, I said. Mom gave it to me before she died. Priscilla wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I spent my whole life trying to get Dad to choose me, she said. When he started hiding your letters, I thought I'd finally won. I didn't understand, until that night, that he was just teaching me how to erase you before you could leave me again. You knew about the forged email, I said. Not a question. Yes. No excuse followed it. That mattered. I'm sorry, she said. Not for getting caught. For deciding your life belonged to my fear of losing him. I didn't forgive her at that table. Forgiveness offered too quickly is just another kind of silence. But I stayed until both our coffees went cold, and that felt, for the first time in a long time, like an honest beginning instead of a performance of one. The real inheritance came later, the way it usually does, quietly, and long after the part everyone else would have called the ending. Mr. Aldrich reached out a few weeks after the reunion. My mother had left a package with him years earlier, with instructions to deliver it only if my father ever tried to publicly erase my service. Inside was her old recipe box, the mint green tin she'd kept on the counter my entire childhood. Tucked between the recipe cards, she'd hidden photographs, clipped articles, and handwritten notes about every achievement of mine she'd ever heard about secondhand. My commissioning. My first deployment. My promotion to lieutenant commander. My selection to lead Iron Current, a name she should never have known and somehow did anyway. Beside one newspaper clipping about a Navy award ceremony she'd never been invited to, she'd written, Nora thinks nobody sees her because the work has to stay quiet. I see her. I have always seen her. I only wish she understood that being unseen by Warren doesn't mean she's invisible. I sat alone at my kitchen table and read every page twice. That was the recognition I'd actually wanted, all along. Not the helicopter. Not the admiral's salute. My mother's handwriting, pressed between recipes for cornbread and apple cake, quietly keeping score on my behalf for 20 years while I assumed no one in that house had been paying attention at all. For most of my adult life, I believed silence made me strong. I believed that explaining myself would somehow shrink the value of what I'd actually done. The Navy taught me discipline. Life taught me the difference between discipline and disappearing. You don't owe every room your full story. But you should always know exactly who's writing it while you stay quiet, because someone usually is, whether you've noticed or not. Priscilla and I speak occasionally now. We aren't repaired, not fully, and I'm not sure we ever will be in the way people mean when they use that word. But we're honest with each other, which is a considerably better foundation than the one we grew up standing on. I still serve. I still walk into rooms without announcing what I've done in them. I still prefer the edge of a crowd to the center of a stage. The only real difference now is this: I no longer confuse humility with permission to let someone else decide who I am on my behalf. If your own family has ever reduced your whole life down to a version that protected their own comfort instead of the truth, I want you to remember something. Their refusal to look closer was never a measurement of your worth. It was only ever a measurement of how much they were willing to see.